The windows are unclosed.
Yeah, it's because we got a window.
It sounds like a howling wind, you know. Wilt zal ik eigenlijk zijn gangen leren in de bittere wind, in de bittere schnee. Okay, today's broadcast is sponsored by your Pesach Hidel, Le'il Nishmas, his mother, whose boy beyond Yortzeit is going to be this Thursday, and the name of his mother, I'm going to bring it up because I don't remember it by heart. I know she had three names, so I have to find.
Ya'nטע Balimmah.
Ya'nטע Balimmah. Oh, that was it. Ya'nטע Balimmah.
This is all you got to tell everybody who Pesach Hidel is.
Not Avraham David. It's not Avraham David.
Ya'nטע Balimmah Bashan Rafal Avraham.
Rafal Avraham.
Whose Yortzeit is this Thursday, Gimel Kislev. Today is also the Yortzeit of Rabbi Yosy Shmuel. I don't know his mother's name, but he is someone that we rely on every single day. He was the Mechaber of the Maseres Hashas. And interesting enough, the Chidah of Yosef Shmuel. Yosef was added on, his name was really Shmuel, but he refused to accept, he was a very element, he refused to accept the Rabbanos of Frankfurt when it was offered to him. And right after that, he got very, very sick. And he felt that it was because he turned down the request of the city of Frankfurt. So he said that if I survive, I'm going to become a Rebbe. I'm going to take on the position of Rebbe, which he did. And the Chidah, I didn't know that. The Chidah wrote biographies. So the Chidah wrote a biography on this Yid. And he wrote on him that he was Mekayim v'dibarta Bum. Bum is Membeis, 42. And he said that the Maseres Hashas finished Shas 42 times.
42 times? I'm sure we saw the finished Shas 50 times already. It was only 50, you know.
I don't know.
In 2 hours.
I don't know what the Maseres Hashas considered finishing. It could be it was like sets of 3. I don't know what he called learning.
Or maybe finishing one, like the Shas was a bigger deal.
But that's what the Chidah wrote about him. Okay, so we are up to the Gemara Kitanoi. So we discussed a machlokes. If somebody finds himself on a tree on Shabbos, is he supposed to climb up that tree on Shabbos? And there was a steering brises. One brisa said you should, one brisa said you shouldn't. The Gemara said it's going to be totally if you're in many different trials, either one's shagig, one's mazid, or they're both shagig, and it's shagig, you're kind of shagig to mazid, or it might depend on if you climbed up the tree before Shabbos or not. There's a bunch of different versions of machlokes. And then the Gemara brought machlokes tanoim that the Gemara wants to say would hinge on this shaila. Hanitnim b'matana achas. What happens? We're on Daf Kuf Amud Aleph, about 15 lines from the bottom. Omar Abhuna ben Yeshua Ketanoi. I'm happy you stopped me because I forgot to quote Rav Huna ben Yeshua. Omar Abhuna ben Yeshua Ketanoi. Hanitnim b'matana achas. There's many karbonas that the dam that you spritz, you only put one matana on the mizbeach. And Rashi tells us examples of that are, I believe Rashi said, dam ha-bechor. So you have a dam of a bechor, which only has one matana. So you had two karbonas bechor, and their bloods got mixed together. So how do you spritz the blood? You take this combined blood that has two karbonas in it, and you spritz it one matana. And this way, every carbon got what it was needed. What if you had matan dalad, the matan dalad? You had two carbonas, such as a carbon oila. Rashi says, damchatos. If you had damchatos, which needs 4 separate matnas dam with a matnas chatos. So then again, you do the same thing. You nosnu the matnan dalad. That's all of it.
No, I can't do it. It's all because the wind stopped.
Oh.
The window is so rusty. So
okay. Matandal, you don't do matandal. You just spritz this combined blood in 4. But what happens if matan arba mois b'matan nachas? What if you had the blood of a carbon that needs 4 matanas dam that was mixed with the blood of a carbon that only needs 1 matanas dam? If you give 4 matnas dam, you're being over baltoisif on the blood that was only supposed to have 1 matana. And if you only put 1 matana, you're not properly fulfilling you are fulfilling it, because the Gemara does say that even if you only did one matnas tam, it'll work, but you're still not fulfilling it the way it was supposed to be done. So that's where we have a shiloh. You're best off spritzing both of these bloods, this combined blood, with matan daled, and don't worry about the baltosis. Better off put less blood, only one matana, and the one that needed 4 will have to settle for 1. And Rashi tells us anyway, but the evidence good. How could you, Rabbi Yeshua, reduce the amount of matanas required for the one that needs matan daled? Are you over about tigra? You're being over on minimizing the amount of matanas that have to be brought. Because if it wasn't good, then it's not an agent to do only one matnas tam, because then one would possible. No, you're over because you're supposed to do it, but it doesn't mean the carbon is possible. Amar lo Rabbi Yeshua, according to you, if you pour 4 matnas damim, then the carbon that only needed 1, on that you're able to Amar Eliezer, the only time there's an Isser Bal Taisif is Ela Kashu Ba'atzmai. If you have this dam that only requires 1 matana by itself, and then you made 4 spritzings, there it will be Bal Taisif, because you did it for no reason. Here, when it's part of a mixture, you wouldn't be over Bal Taisif. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, well, I can use your svara as well. Lo nemer Bal Tigra Ela Kashu Ba'atzmai. The only time the Torah mandates the 4 matnas damim is if you have the blood by itself, but if it's mixed with a blood that only needs 1 matana, then you wouldn't be overly sugar. The oid Amar Rabbi Yeshua, and I'll tell you something else of Rabbi Yeshua. Kishin asata, when you actually, according to your letter, you make 4 matnas damim, when you're actually doing a positive action of making 4 matnas damim, avarta al bal toishav vasisa ma'isa biyadecha. You weren't stam over bal toishav. You were over bal toishav through a ma'isa that you've done. You proactively were over an aver. But if you're over an aver by not putting enough matnas damim, which is my approach, at least you did it b'shav al tasa. We know it's much worse to do an aver b'kum vasei than it is to do an aver b'shav al tasa. So Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Lezer. So now that we have this machlokes, is it better to do something actively to be mekayim mitzvah, or is it better not to do anything? Zok Gemara, how does that apply to us? Rabbi Lezer, Amar Hasam Kum Asay Adif. According to Rabbi Lezer, hold it's better to do things, even though do something bekum vasei, even though it involves a problem, but at least you're mekayim mitzvah. Well, the hachanami yerit. It would make sense here that the person should climb off the tree, even though while he's climbing off the tree, being mishamash be'ilam, but it's for the greater good because eventually he'll be off the tree on Shabbos. So that's why he would hold you should climb off. And the Rabbi Yeshua, the Amar Hashem, Shav al Tasa Adaf, according to Rabbi Yeshua, who says better, don't do it, take an action that's going to positively be over on something. Hachanam Rabbi Yeshua would hold, stay put. Sure, you don't want to be on the tree at all, but you're going to have to climb down the tree. Better not do anything. If you're going to be over an Isser, you're better off being over the Isser by not doing anything than by doing it bekum vasei. Zok Gemara, I don't think you have a good raya to compare their machlokes by karbonis to our shaila of whether or not you should climb off a tree. Domalohi, Ad kan like Rabbi Lezer Hasam Kumasei Adif. Where did Rabbi Lezer say that it's worthwhile doing the Isser of Al Toisa bekum vasei elo de ka'avid mitzvah? At the end of the day, you're doing a mitzvah by making the 4 zrikas, so you're accomplishing a real mitzvah. Avalacha l'avid mitzvah, by climbing off the tree, you're not being mekayim a mitzvah. You might be avoiding Isser, but you're not being mekayim a mitzvah. Rabbi Lezer would only allow you to do something bekum vasei if you're actually being mekayim a mitzvah while you're doing that. Hachanami lo yered, over here he would agree you shouldn't climb down. Binami, on the flip side, Ad kan lo come Rabbi Yeshua Hasam Shaval Tasadav. Where did Rabbi Yeshua say that better don't do anything and don't be mekayim the mitzvah? Ella, we have a Maseres Hashas. It's Yortzeit today, so we're going to look at the Maseres Hashas. Rabbi Yosy Shmuel, I don't know who his father was. Rabbi Yosy Shmuel. Shaval Tasadav. The Eloi, because if you don't do it, the Loi Kavod Yisura. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm mixing up the Maseres Hashas with the Bach. I am very sorry. You're right. I mixed it up. I'm sorry.
Very strange Gemara.
But let me just finish the line. Here, we're right now staying on the trees, being over Nisr, even Rabbi Shua would be moida that you should climb down the tree. So what's the feet?
You know, the mitzvah of doing zrikas adam, right, is a mitzvah, right? You know, when all is said and done, the carbon is going to be kosher.
No, if you don't do zrika, it will not be kosher. You have to do some zrika.
Right, but I'm saying you have to do some zrika, but without the four thing, without the four, if the carbon only gets one, it's a mitzvah. But staying in a tree, right, where the Gemara says is not a mitzvah at all, meaning coming down from a tree is not being mekayim mitzvah. What kind of Shabbos is staying in a tree?
A halachic Shabbos.
No. What kind of Shabbos does a person have if he stays in a tree?
You know, so
that's what you're saying. A halachic Shabbos.
Let me ask you: if you're stuck out of the tchum on Shabbos, what kind of Shabbos you can have there? You can have a halachic Shabbos. You're going to stay where you need to be. The greatest covered Shabbos is doing what you need to do. Somebody once asked, if you have dirt on your jacket, shouldn't you wipe it off? The greatest cover of Shabbos is not wiping it off because you're showing cover for the Shabbos. So the greatest cover of Shabbos is to follow the halachas of Shabbos.
That tells us that a Kiddush Hashem is not in the hands of the Goyim. Meaning, we don't say that just because the Goyim are happy with the Yidden, right, it's a Kiddush Hashem. And then when we follow halacha and they're not happy with us, then it's a Chil Hashem? No,
it's also Kiddush Hashem.
Kiddush Hashem,
right.
We follow the halacha.
So it's an absolute. That's correct. That's right. Zok Eila Gemara. Rafel used to always ask, I don't understand. It says by Pinchas, so if you think about it, Pinchas was a brutal murderer. Give him the bris of Kanoyas, give him the bris of Emes, but Shalom, that's like exactly the opposite of what he did. So Shalom is done the Shalom. You can answer the Shalom.
Well, my mom says it. In 1980, when he came into Baker's, right? He came in with his son, 6 years old, Shlomi Lowy, right? He had long, flowing blonde pays. Came into Baker's, and he passed by an old lady, right, who was probably born in 1860, you know, in those days, because it was 1980. She says to him, machst du Chil Hashem? So the Rav looks at her, and he's aghast. Making a Chil Hashem? So she says, dan Kind hat pious, the Goyim haben ins Fahren wegen dem. So this is what the point that he was trying to say. She thinks that Chil Hashem is what the Goyim hate us because of.
Tethering to the Goyim is not Chil Hashem, right? I'm sorry, I skipped a line. You're not allowed to climb a tree. Say if it's a moist tree, so clearly it's alive. And even if it's a dried out tree, which seems like it's a dead tree. A dead tree, it's called tolish. You're allowed to walk on. You're allowed to step on the Shabbos. Another brayso. It's only a moist tree that you're not allowed to stand on. This is dried out, meaning it's clearly dead. Rashi says it's not considered mechuber, even if it's not physically felled. But if it's a dead tree, then you're allowed to climb on it. Mutter, that will be mutter, because there's no problem of cutting it because it's not called mechuber. So Amar V'Yidoloi Kashem. It's not a steer between these two rises. Kan b'shegizei machlef. When do we say a dry tree you're not allowed to climb up? That's if it's going to rejuvenate. In the winter, it might look dried up, but eventually it's going to sprout again. And when did the Brisa say that a Yavesh, you're allowed to stand on the Shabbos? It's kind of b'shein gizim achlu. Frank the Gemara, the Brisa that says Yavesh, that usher to climb on, you're saying that means a dried out tree, but it's going to rejuvenate. It's going to rejuvenate come the spring. Gizay machlif, Yavesh karislay. Would it make sense that the Brisa would refer to a perfectly live and healthy tree that's merely dormant now because of the season? That's what the Brisa would refer to as Yavesh. It doesn't make sense. You have to say can be Yosy, can be Yosy. In the Yosy Chama, where trees are supposed to sprout up, if you see a tree is dead, there if you climb on it, nobody's going to have a problem with you because they'll know it's a dead tree. But on the winter, if you climb on what looks to be a dead tree, even though it's really dead, all trees look dead. All trees shed their leaves. Therefore, even on a dead tree, you're not allowed to climb on in the winter because people are going to be choshen. People will think that maybe it's a live tree. Frank the Gemara, the Yosy Chama, even if it's a dead tree in the Yosy Chama, where there's no chashash, everyone knows it's a dead tree, How can you climb it? Hanasri peri. Most trees, even if they're dead, will have some leftover peris, and by climbing it, you're going to be ripping out peris that are on the tree. Zaktimura, but the lekaperi, it's speaking about a tree that has no fruit. I'm not sure why he doesn't talk about leaves. Could be the leaves that we assume there's no left. It's possible even if all the leaves fall off, there's some fruit that would still remain on the tree. And we're worried that those will be torn out.
Who cares what's left on the tree?
I'm sorry?
Who cares what's left on the tree? You're dislodging the leaves.
No, we're assuming this. The Gemara is asking not that you might dislodge leaves, because if it's a dried out tree, I guess the Gemara is assuming that it has no leaves, but it's possible that an old dead tree could still have some fruit hanging off of it.
Also, a dead tree, the branches break easily.
Yeah.
But maybe it just died because it still has some fruit.
Could be, yeah. And I obviously recently did produce fruit. So even if the like a peri, there's no fruit left, so now it's saying you can't even climb on a dead tree unless you know there's no fruit on it. And Rashi says the reason why it would be a problem, even if you cut fruit off a dead tree, it's not an isser midaraisa, but people will say, hey, you're cutting fruit off a tree, they won't be able to make that distinction to not allow you to cut fruit off of a live tree. In fact, the can see, even if there's no fruit, but there's going to be some twigs, something that's going to break off. Like Chaim Tree says, it's a brittle thing. Anywhere you're standing, it's going to crack. So the more bigaduda, it's speaking where it's a smooth log. On the smooth, dead log, that's what you're allowed to walk on. Anything else you're not allowed to walk on. Any fact Gemara, are you saying that by a smooth log you're allowed to walk on Shabbos? He reached the city of Afastaya, also bigaduda. And he didn't even let people walk on clean logs on Shabbos. Why not? So the Gemara, that was a different case. Rav Bika Matzah, we got together. This city, he saw people were very, very lax in Hilchos Shabbos, and because of that, and they didn't have the ability to be able to make a distinction between different things. So you had to put out a blanket issue, no climbing on trees at all, and it was an extra chumrah. I'm sorry.
This is a metaphor.
Yeah, Matzah Bika. He didn't really find a valley. He found a void. Rashi says, "Einon b'nei Torah sheyedu lihizoyer kebikazu she'ein lo shomer ba'koil parents." It's a hefkevelt. So therefore, he had to put down the letter of the law. This is a little bit of a sensitive Gemara. No, actually, this Gemara is not yet sensitive. The next Gemara is going to be a little more sensitive. Also, you're not allowed to walk on the grass on Shabbos. Don't get alarmed. This is not halacha l'maisa. You're not allowed to walk on grass on Shabbos. Why? It says in the pasuk, somebody who's careless and not careful with his feet, in other words, he walks where he shouldn't, it will be an avera. And Rabbi Bar Abba, Amar Rav wants to learn that this is referring to people walking on grass. Let's see what the pasuk says. The Torah, Gam beloy das, because the Gemara is going to dash in the second half of the pasuk soon. Gam beloy das, nefesh like even without thinking, it's going to be a bad nefesh. But Otzberaglayim, and someone who's just careless and stomps around with his feet and not careful, chayte will do others. Tanichad, we learned one brayso that said, Muter leilachal gabe yasavim b'Shabbos. You're allowed to walk on grass on Shabbos. The Tanya Yidich Osir, and the other brayso says you can't. So what is it? Loikash habalachim hayivation. If it's moist grass, you're not allowed to walk on it because you might tear it out. But if it's dead, dry grass, then you'd be allowed to walk on it. The bayisema habalachim. Both braysos are speaking of moist grass. In the summer, you're not allowed to walk on moist grass, not because you might kill the grass or tear the grass, because the grass has seeds in it, and you're going to dislodge the seeds from the grass. Where the grass does not have any seeds in it, and therefore walking on it, we're not worried you'll tear the grass out, but we have no need to be concerned that you'll dislodge seeds in the grass because there are no seeds in the grass. I wonder if it was grass seeds or if it was dandelion seeds. But whatever it is, there are some seeds there. I'm thinking of those things, those little things that grow in the summer with the dandelion seeds. We're both talking about the B'yom Shechava, and there's a time where you're allowed to walk on the grass B'yom Shechava, and there are times when you're not. At this point, the Gemara is backing away from its concern about the seeds, and we're actually concerned that you'll tear the grass out. So if you're wearing shoes and you have soles just flat, then we're not concerned that you're going to tear the grass out. You might stomp on it, but you won't tear it out. But if you're not wearing shoes, the grass will get stuck in between your toes, and when you walk, you're going to tear some grass out inadvertently. In both cases, you're wearing shoes. One guy's wearing golf shoes that have spikes at the bottom of it that will wrap around the grass and tear the grass out. That you're not allowed to wear. But regular shoes, you'd be allowed to wear. I still remember as a little child, my father once took me clothing shopping, and I hated when my father took me clothing shopping. And he wanted to buy me a pair of shoes he thought was very nice. And I thought they were hideous. I was embarrassed. I didn't want to wear those shoes. And then he turned them over and he saw spikes coming out of them. I said, Baruch Hashem, they're golf shoes. So I didn't have to buy them. In both cases, in other words, there's a tzad to say that it would be mutter to walk around with golf shoes on grass. If it's long grass that will get wrapped around the shoes, the spikes, then you're not allowed to walk on the grass. But if it's short grass, if it's in the putting area, then you're allowed to walk around because you're not concerned about tearing the grass out. Well, idna, and here's the final answer. Idna, the kaimon keb shimin. Now that we hold anyway a davar she'ein mechaven is not a problem. Kulu shari, everything's allowed because when you're walking on grass, even if by mistake you tear the grass out, that's definitely not your intention. It's a davar she'ein mechaven. It's not psikresha, and even in the case where it's psikresha like nichalei, and it's not the derech. In other words, the derech to cut grass is not by stomping on it; it's to use a lawnmower. So therefore, side psikresha like nichalei, side's not the derech. And side and mechavin, and therefore nowadays there's no problem walking on the grass.
What about on the tree?
Yeah.
Well, what's going to do? Say something. What? You started first.
I said, what if like spikes or women's shoes?
Well, they're making a hole in the earth. They're not tearing out the grass.
So making holes in the
Again, it's definitely a davar she'ein mechavin. It's a davar she'ein mechavin. Even if it's psikresha, it's definitely not the way it's done. So the post can hold. You're allowed. What do you think about a tree?
What about standing on a tree? It's davar she'ein mechaven, to break the branches.
Oh yeah, but you're right. If you break the branch by mistake, there's no issue. The reason why you're not allowed to climb up on a tree is we're afraid you'll actually go and cut it. We're afraid you're going to cut a branch off. That's why you're not allowed to climb on a tree. And that's the same reason why you're not allowed to ride an animal, because we're afraid you'll cut off a branch from a tree to use as a prod to the animal. So anytime if something breaks by mistake, avada, you're not over the rice.
Like when we said we were allowed to stand on a dead tree,
Right?
so then it's not a problem that you might break a branch.
There's never, even on a live tree, if you stand on a live tree and you break a branch, you're not over anything. You're over of the derbanon that you weren't allowed to climb on the tree in the first place. But if you inadvertently break a branch, it's a davar she'ein mechaven. According to Rav Shimon, it's not a problem at all. So you're right. If you stand on the tree and by mistake a branch breaks, there's no problem with the fact that the branch broke. But the Rabbanan are still going to say you did an aver, you weren't allowed to be on the tree in the first place. Are you asking why the Rabbanan answered? If
No.
if it breaks by mistake, I'm not over.
Oh, we segued from a tree to grass, no?
We segued from tree to grass. Right.
That's why you can't climb a tree, but what about coming back down?
Once the Rabbanan say you're not allowed to be on a tree, you're not allowed to be on a tree, period.
Whether you're going up or down.
Why can't you come back down?
Because the Rabbanan said you're not allowed to climb on a tree, and you're using a tree to climb. You're climbing down. You're not allowed to climb. You want to know why the Rabbanan didn't say you're allowed to climb down, but you're not allowed to climb up? The Rabbanan said you're not allowed to climb, period. Up or down.
Tell Mati he shouldn't think we're so impolite. Do be such a
Oh, Chaim Tzvi wants you to know that we're not impolite here. Duvi actually said shalom aleichem to you. Okay, Mati says, Machalal. Chizak the Gemara factor. This Gemara, you can ask as many questions as you want on the next Gemara. I'm just not sure I'll be able to answer them all. But ask is in the height. It says, Otz Beraglayim, someone who's lax, callous with his legs, someone who's callous with his legs, what did it say in the pasuk again? Otz Beraglayim Choyti Das Naveira. So now we're not translating Beraglayim as literally legs. We're referring to when it says Bei Raglea, Kora, Nafal, Shochav. It's talking about Sisra fell in between the legs of Yal. That's the type of legs that we're talking about. So Zok to Gemara. A person is not allowed to force his wife into a dvar mitzvah. And you can use your imagination as to which mitzvah it is that you're not allowed to force your wife into. One who who's callous with what Rashi says is that bein ragleha, meaning with the act that involves bein ragleha, he's doing an affair. If someone forces his wife to do mitzvahs, and it doesn't mean beit nichala, it's going to net children that are not proper children. Where do you see that in the pasuk? So the Gemara, it's the beginning of this same pasuk of Ha'at, where it says gam beloy das. If you do this mitzvah without the agreement, without the willful participation of your wife, nefesh loy toiv, it's going to net a nefesh that's loy toiv. Tanya mihachi gam beloy das nefesh loy toiv ze akoyfe ishtoi l'dvar mitzvah. That's someone who forces his wife to do a dvar mitzvah. That's zehaboil v'shoyne. That's someone who is boiled twice in the same session. In fact, the more is that also to do? Any is that also to do? Adirabah, Amar Rava, Haroitza Lasas called Button of Zacharim. If he wants that all of his children should be male, Yivil v'yishna. And Rashi tells us that the Rashi tells that if the Isha is Mazriya Tchila, then it will be a male child. Now, I assume the word Mazriya means to ovulate. I assume that's what it means. I never knew if it meant to ovulate or if it meant to orgasm, but I assume it means to ovulate. But the word is, by being boiled once, it will create taiva in the woman, and therefore it'll make her ovulate. And then when you boil a second time, the second bia would have been a bia that was the Isha Mazras Tchila, and that's how it works to have sons. Zok to Gemara, it's not shver, because here we say you shouldn't be boiled twice, yet Rava says you need to be boiled twice. It's a technique in order to have bonim schorim. But the more, sure you should be boiled twice. If your wife is happy with that and she wants that, yeah, then it's a good method. But if your wife is not happy with that, then it's ospra glaim choite because you want a son. It doesn't mean you have the right to abuse your wife. Kol isha shetoivas baila l'dvar mitzvah. A woman who asks her husband to do a mitzvah with her, that's a good thing. Such a woman, now she's not just mistava for Rabbi, she's mistava because she wants to become pregnant. She wants to have a child. So if she does that, she'll have such good children that even in the door of Moshe, they didn't have such good children. What does that mean? The door of Moshe, it was said, Havu lachem anoshim chachamim unavonim v'yidum l'shuftechem. Moshe was instructed to assemble men that had these qualities, chachamim, navonim, and yiduim. But what did Moshe actually do? Uksiv, he wasn't able to find someone that we could check off all of these things on the checklist. He came short. It says the ekach es rosh shuftechem anoshim chachamim v'yidum. He couldn't find Navonim. And Rashi says the meaning of Navonim is someone who's maven davar mitoich davar. You teach him one thing and he can build from what you taught him to learn other things. And he wasn't able to find that. But if you look up in Leah, and we know Leah did demand of Yaakov to be with her one night. The night that she sold her deduim. But Tamer Elai Tovai, she told her husband Yaakov, tonight you're going to come to me. Because I rented you. And who was born that night? Who was conceived that night? Yisachar. And what does it say about Yisachar? Yisachar yoyde bina leitim ladas mayasa Yisrael rashayim Mosayim. There was 200 of them, and they all had bina to be maven as to what the Eden should do. And everybody listened to them. So you see, Yisachar had this extra bina, and the Gemara is suggesting this extra bina came from the fact that Leah went out and told Yaakov, "You're mine tonight."
How come Moshe couldn't find him?
These are the Bnei Yisachar that I guess were later. They weren't there at the time. You're asking Yisachar's children should have been there. How come he couldn't find them? That's a good point. It's a good point. But I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why he couldn't find them, because this is much later. I think it's the Chazal Sofer, who Rabbi Elevitz spoke out from, is the reason why you couldn't have the Nevonim. Why weren't there Nevonim in those days? Even from the Bnei Yisachar, why weren't there Nevonim? And this I need David Zolti's help for. Because they didn't learn the Torah yet. So I don't know if this was before Matan Torah, but they didn't have the Torah yet. They didn't have the Torah, they couldn't be Nevonim. Because you can't be Mavin Dover M'Teich Dover if you didn't learn the Dover yet. So how could they be Chachamim? So the Chazal Sofer brings a raya from here that to be a Chacham, you don't have to really know anything. You have to be a Mavakish. All these people had such a tshuka to learn. There was nothing to learn yet, but they had such a tshuka to learn. Bigam avakish chachma. That's called a chacham. But on Novain, there you actually have to have information. So my question to David is: this story that happened, did it happen before Matan Torah? The case of Havu Lachem Anoshim Chachamim Unavodim?
Okay, so there's, I think it did happen before now. I think it did.
That's what I was hoping you were going to say.
Or it happened at Matan Torah. Hold on a second. No, happened after, because this is when they picked the Sanhedrin, didn't it? Or was that, the question is this the one that was Yisro's suggestion, or is it the one with Eldad and Medad where they made the Sanhedrin?
I thought this was by Eldad and Medad. It's in Devarim. It's Devarim.
So
Aleph.
that's after
right at the
Matan
beginning of
Torah.
Devarim.
So that's after Matan Torah.
So then what I'm saying doesn't make sense because they had Torah already. So they could have been Nevi'im already.
The word is a chazor.
Right. So we don't know what time period it's referring to. I don't know what time period it's referring to. But this word that the elephants said over was based on the fact that this occurred before Matan Torah, and that's why it was impossible to have Nevi'im.
Well,
no, I think that's a good vort, that the Torah, after the Torah, they actually became Nevonim, because there's a pasuk that says Am Chacham v'Navon. Right. So
yes.
they had to become. They were
but
ready.
But at the time where Moshe could only fight Chachamim, that had to be before Matan Torah.
Or was right around Matan Torah. Was
so
soon, either soon.
People to
they didn't. Right. They didn't.
Okay, so that makes sense.
There's happened no riot from the Gemara. The Gemara is bothered why we see Yisachar had kindlech that were Nevoinim, but we see that he had to wait until
it was later.
Until
it was much later
to get
yeah.
these Nevoinim.
It was much later once they had the Torah to be able to.
Right. So you have to wait 700 years to get Nevoinim. It's not worth it.
Why? It's very worth it. Why is it not worth it?
What?
Why is it not worth it?
Well, I'd rather have Nevoinim right away.
You know how many thousands of years Abraham Avinu was waiting for us to get it there to Yisrael? And it was still worth it for him.
No, you might as well have a deal. You might as well have a deal, or the Yitzonis, get rid of the Yitzonis. And I don't want to have to wait until 2700 to have a Nevoinim.
I hear. Take the more. How could you say this? How could you say this? That it's a good thing to demand for a woman to demand biyah, but it says Eser klolos neskal lachava. Chava was cursed 10 klolos. Tichsiv Elisha Amar. He told the woman harba arba. So I'm going to count it. These are 2 tipei damim. Achas dam nidav, achas dam basulam. So these are 2 things that a woman suffered. Etzvaynech is that tzagidul banim. So everybody asks, only the woman has tzagidul banim, not the man. They're just asking the mother. She'll tell you, yeah. We deal with most of the issues. The heroinech zetzar iber, that's the tzar of pregnancy, and they ask, isn't sagidul banim after pregnancy, not before pregnancy? The teretz is you're right, it is after, but sagidul banim lasts a much longer time than the 9 months of iber, so that's why it was put in first, because it's a much bigger thing. Okay, but childbirth is painful. That's 5. Well, she very wants to be mistabik with her husband when he goes away. He doesn't have that, so that also puts her at a disadvantage. So that's 6. But he is the one who's going to rule over you. A woman might very much want her husband, but she could only express it in her heart. A man can be Tavei B'Peh, which is actually 7, not 10, which the Gemara is going to deal with. So Dr. Gemara, Zuhi Mida Toiva Shebenoshim. That's a Mida Toiva. A woman is not supposed to. We all know a woman is not supposed to be Tavei B'Peh. So what's shot that you're saying here? It's a good thing. So Dr. Gemara, Kikar Mina and the Maratze Atzuriye Kamei. It doesn't mean that she actually comes out and articulates it and verbalizes it, but she can do things that will show that she's interested. And that she's allowed to do, that's a mitzvah for her to do. Zok Rashi, the Maratza Atzuriye Kamei, Mara Lefanov in Yonechiba. She shows him that she's interested. This is a Gemara that women need to learn. They need to be able to show their husband that they're interested. They have to show an interest. Huh? I'm saying this to the world.
Okay, here you go.
Zok the Gemara. Hani Sheva Havyon. We only listed off 7, not 10. I Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi started off saying that there were 10 clothes. So tomorrow, Yasser Avdimi, he added 3 additional ones. Omar Atufa Aval, she's covered over like a novel because a woman, Boisha Lotzeis Peroisha Perua, she'll always cover her hair. Umanuda Mikol Adam, she's removed from other people. We'll see what that means soon. The Chavusha Meves Asurim, and she's locked in jail because it says Kol Kvuda Bas Melech Pnima. My Menuda Mikol Adam. What does Menuda Mikol Adam means? If it's Isra Yichud, that's not a call to her over to him, because Iunami Asr Yichud. A man is also not allowed Yichud. A woman may not marry 2 men, but a man may marry 2 women. So these are the 3 clothes. In the Brisa we learned a different 3 final clothes, and that is Megadelas Sar Kalilas. She grows long hair like Lilas. I don't know, something for shade, I think. When she urinates, she has to be sitting down. And since the normal position of Bia is with the man on top, so she's her husband's pillow. Her husband's lying on her. That's also not so gishmak. The idich, Dini said that these 3 things are not clothes. So that's why he didn't count these things as clothes. They're good for her. So Rashi says, Yeshevish u'meshtanes is it's bitznius. It's a mila to a woman that when she goes to the washroom, she's more tzenua. That's a mila. And she doesn't lose anything by it. And that's a kaila baila. That's one perspective. She's supporting her husband's weight. On the other hand, he's got to do all the work. So mila, she also doesn't eat. She can lie there, he has to do the work. Tznius is a mila. And the third thing that's mila, having long hair is a mila. She has beautiful hair. So these are all 3 things that would not be considered clothes. That's why they weren't listed by Rabbi.
And Rabbi's things were clothes. The fact that she was that she's a tzinua, the basmalach benima, and the fact
she can't be out there. She can't be out there.
These aren't clothes.
She can't be out there. It's a sacrifice. She can't be famous. She can't be Barbara Streisand. The Omer Abchia, my decision is taken pasuk. Melafnoi. What's the lashon? Malpenu. Malpenu mi behemis aretz. We learn how to behave from behemoths of the land, and from the birds of the sky we become clever. This is referring to a female mule that is tzenua, and when it's not mashing, it bends down, and we learn from that. This is referring to a rooster. This is fascinating. A rooster first talks and seduces his mate, and then he takes action. And we're soon going to see how that works. Even if the Torah wasn't given, the Torah teaches how to behave. But even if it wasn't for the Torah, you made him sneeze mechasol, would be able to sneeze from a cat who never goes to the bathroom in public. The gezel and the mullah, and the mullah who never steals. He always prepares whatever he needs for the winter. He prepares all summer without stealing from another ant. Because a dove sticks with its mate, it's completely monogamous its whole life. And derech eretz mitarnagol, and we would learn proper the respect from a rooster. Shemafayis v'achachboil. That's mama mafayis lo. And Rashi says what it does is it spreads its wings out when it's trying to seduce the female. What does the spreading of the wing means? It means as follows. This is unbelievable. He tells her, "Oh, I love you so much. I'm going to buy you the Vinalech Ziga. I'm going to buy you a beautiful long coat. The Matulei at Karech. I'm going to buy you such a beautiful coat. He promises her the world. That's why he spreads his wings out to show. I'm going to buy you a beautiful pelts, like I'm showing you with my arms. But that's only before he gets her. After he gets her, he says, "Thank you, ma'am. I'm out of here." And what the rooster actually does is after the rooster like bends its head, bows its head to the Tarnagoylis, and that's meant to say, my crown should be cut off. If I have the money to buy it, I don't buy it for you. In other words, sorry, I don't have the money. If I had the money, it would be very bad if I didn't buy it for you. But I don't have the money. Sure, I promise you the world. What am I supposed to do?
I think the Pashup
this guy who was standing in the field, and he was telling his son, if I had a huge flock, if I had a big, huge fur pelts, I would give it to Mother Russia. Punished. If I would have a big, beautiful tractor, I would give it to the motherland. So his son asked him, Tavi, you have a beautiful flock of sheep. Why don't you do that? No, I have that. I can't say that. That I have. I'm only willing to promise what I don't have. What I do have, I'm not willing to promise. Zok the Commissioner Weiter.
Rabbi Yochanan is strange. Rabbi Yochanan says that without the Torah we can learn from the animals.
Right.
But we need the Torah to tell us which animals to learn from. I'm not supposed to learn sneeze from a dog, and I'm not supposed to learn,
I guess you need a little bit of an knowing. You need a little bit of common sense. Which mile play from which person? Okay, let's see the head of the more back. We're 10 minutes up. Hadela sheba muksa. Muksa is the backyard of a house which was very, very rarely used, and the Rishonim say it's used less than once in 30 days, and therefore this door is very, very rarely used. So if you have a door to the muksa, or chadakim sheba pirza, and they're like bundles of thorns that you use to pile up just to close the doorway, umachtzolosh or mat that you're using to close the doorway, ain't no element. You're not allowed to put them in front of a doorway on Shabbos. You know why? Because they're not things that people obviously use as doors. And it's not like this door was noticed that everybody knows you have this apparatus to close the door. So it looks like you're building a wall. And therefore, it's going to be usher. So ain't no element. You're not allowed to use them on Shabbos. The oven binyan. It's like he's building. Zok the Mishnah Weiter. Elam can gavoyim in oritz. Unless they're literally hanging off. You took this makeshift door and you have a chain that hangs it to the wall, so it's connected to the wall, and it doesn't rest on the floor. It's actually suspended in the air. So that clearly indicates that this is connected and part of the wall, the doorway.
The window case in Shabbos. Yeah.
That's right. It's very similar to that. Mashaykin, if it was just leaning on the ground, even though it was tied down to the wall, it still looks like you're building, and you're not allowed to build on Shabbos. Fair to Gemara, Urumini. Dallas, and this Shiloh is Nageya actually. This Shiloh was Nageya if if your storefront window gets smashed on Shabbos, are you allowed to board it up on Shabbos? So there are those who are makel because it's done through a goy and it's for sure not permanent. No one thinks it's permanent, but there's a whole bunch of shilos about it. But it's also based on this binyan on Shabbos. Or in effect, Gemara, Delas hanigreris. You had a door that was dragging on the ground, so it sounds like it's connected, but it's dragging on the ground. Umachtelas hanigreris, or a mat that's dragging on the ground. So even though it's suspended from a chain, but the chain is long enough that's allowing the bottom of the machtelas to drag on the ground. The kankan and nigger, or if you had some type of jug that you were using as a doorway, as a door, is manchik shurin utluin. If they're tied and hanging, you are allowed to use them, it seems, even though they're dragging on the ground, which is not consistent with our Mishnah. You're surely allowed to do it on Yom Tov. So it's a stira. Our Mishnah says that if they're dragging on the ground, you wouldn't be allowed to put them and close the door with them. Yet the Brisa seems to say as long as they're hanging off the wall, it's good enough. Omar Abaye, the Brisa has another feature. If anybody knows the Lego doors, the way their hinges work, you know those little Lego sets, a little pin on the top, a little pin on the bottom that went into a hole. That's the tzir. They didn't have the type of hinges that we have. So since those doors that you used had that pin, so they have another feature that indicates that it's a door. So therefore, if it has that feature, even if it's dragging on the floor, you'd be allowed to put it back in place. Rav Amar, even if it doesn't have that now, but it once had it, that would be good enough. That would be good enough. Even though right now there's no heker, even though the pin is knocked off, you could still see that there was once a pin there. It's enough to show that this is a door, and therefore, even though they're dragging on the ground, you're allowed to put them back. Zok the Mishnah about there. Meisvei, Delas hanegreris, a door that's dragging, umachtelas hanegreris, and a mat that's dragging, the kankan hanegrer, bisman shepshurin utluyin ugavoyim in arts, if they're hanging and they're above the ground, afilu malanima, even a hair's breadth, as long as they're not in contact with the ground, you're allowed to close the door with them. Now, this is not a kasha. This is not a problem at all, right? How is this a problem with our Mishnah? Our Mishnah also says that if it's not on the ground, so
with the first prices.
why? Here it's saying it's not. Here it's saying if it's If it's not dragging on the ground, it's allowed.
Why does it says that even if it's dragging?
Yeah, but we already took care of that. That's because it has a tzir. Right? We already took care of that with the steer of the Mishnah. This doesn't tell us anything more than the Mishnah would. So the Gemara, so the Rishonim learned that this is not a kasha on Rava and not a kasha on Abaye. It's just a steer minay on the brisa because this delas on the greres is mashma that's dragging on the floor, and then when the brisa gets into the specifics, the brisa says that it's hanging. So it's a steer minay obey. So Abaye would have his way of understanding this brisa. For Rava mitaris l'tamei, Abaye mitaris l'tamei. It means it's when oy sheyesh lehem tzir, oy shegavay min aretz. So he sticks into the he sort of sticks into the brisa. His man shekshurin v'yesh lehem tzir, oy tluyin. So therefore, exactly. So the ratio of the brisa that says negreris you can put back is speaking when they had a tzir, and if it's hanging, it doesn't need a tzir. Rabbi mataris to make a shahayel lehem tzir, oy shegavay min aretz. The same thing. If it had a tzir, then there's a hekra. Suche koitzim, bundles of thorns, the chavilin and other bundles of twigs, that you prepare to use as a door to close an opening in a chutzner. When they're hanging in the alam behen, Shabbos, you're surely allowed to on Yom. Delas almona, a widowed doorway, which the Gemara is going to explain to you what that is. Hanagreris that's dragging on the floor. Einay alamba, you're not allowed to use to close the opening on Shabbos. Hey chedami delas halmana. What is that delas halmana? Ikudami dechat shiva. It's made of one board, like one big 2x4, or I'm sorry, one big plywood. Which doorways normally are made out of multiple sections, so it doesn't look like a door. Ikudami delas like yishama. It might be multiple sections, but there's no board going across that keeps them all together. They're nailed together, but there's no board on the outside of them that joins them all together, which is normally how doors are made. So therefore, since it looks less like a door, it has more restrictions. Now we're talking about binyan. Now, when you make a bonfire, the way you normally make a bonfire, you don't just have a solid pile of wood, because if air doesn't get underneath it, it's not going to burn properly. So you have to sort of make some vertical pieces of wood and then put a piece of wood on top of it so that air can get underneath it. But technically, you're building a binyan. So therefore, Haimedurta mimayla lamata shari. When you build it, first you have to take the piece of wood that's going to be on top, and then you take wood and slide it underneath. So even though you're sort of making an oil, but you're making it backwards. You're not putting the side posts and then the top. So that's how you would have to assemble Madura. Of course, this is on Yom Tov. Mimayla lamata shari mamata lamayla also. You couldn't build from the ground up. The Chem Beyosa. There's different shot in Beyosa, but much of shot is if you want to fry an egg on a pan, you have to first hold the pan up there and then build what you're going to put it on. And of course, there's a shaila. What if you have a pre-made thing? Avada, you're allowed to put that there first and put it on. But if you didn't have some pre-made stand, then you'd have to hold the frying pan there and then build a stand. The chen kidra, and the same thing would be with a pot. If you were putting a pot above a flame, they used to put like two barrels on either side to lean the pot on, to hold the pot above the flame. Again, you have to have the pot there first before you put the side panels. There were beds that people put together, these mobile beds. Again, hold up the piece of leather that would support the mattress, hold that up, that would be the top of the oil, and then put the side panels in. The chavita, and the same thing if you were piling up barrels, one on top of the other, offset from each other, you should first put the upper barrel in and then slide the two barrels underneath the upper barrel to support it. How Taduki? This Taduki, abrasive guy, told him Shub and Chadanya, you guys are abrasive, you're like thorns. Because it says about Jews, the best of you are like thorns. You're an idiot. You didn't read the whole pasuk. You have to look at the context. Shafil the Sefer the Quran. Look to the bottom of the pasuk where it says, the righteous people are like a shield, they're like a protection to Klal Yisrael. So yeah, we're thorns, we're protective thorns, like the thorns of the porcupine. So it's a mile, not a chasar. What is the lashon of the pasuk which says they're good like a thorn? It's kedem shechadakim halalu maginin ala pirza. Just like these thorns protect the opening, kach toivim shabanu maginim aleinu, our tzaddikim protect us. We crush the Rishayim in Gehenim like Hadek, Hatev, Hatev, Hadek. It's the lashon of crushing, of pulverizing. Shenamar kumi v'doishi bastian. Come crush bastian. He kainich osim basil. I'll make your horns metal, steel. Uparshasayich, and your feet osim nechash. They'll be like copper. V'hadikois amim rabim, and you'll crush your enemies with these features. So Zok Yeshua ben Chananya to the Tzedukah, you're an idiot. These are our weapons. These are our milas with which we protect Klal Yisrael with. Kishkoyach, let's stop here.
Try to figure out for the next year why.
Shkoyach, a good chodesh.